Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back to another book review. Thank you for tuning in. What if human evolution didn't arrive with capes and lasers shooting from eyes, but instead with peculiar inconveniences? A man growing a ginkgo tree from his finger, or people who blink and lose years of their life to time travel, or people who must sleep for months on end. A salaryman with no big dreams or expectations is handed Cabinet 13 and told to keep track of this assortment of freaks and weirdos, while a shadowy organization lurks in the background. So I'm Barry. This is Soul Book Club. Today I'm reviewing The Cabinet by Kim On-soo, translated by Lin Halbert. And it's a sly, satirical sci-fi mosaic that feels like the X-Files crossed with the film Office Space. And it's actually kind of a spiritual cousin to recent Korean sci, or relatively recent Korean sci-fi like Kim Bo-young and in particular Bae Myung-hoon's Tower. And there's another Korean short story by what's her name? By Chong. Oh God. Anyway, there's another short story about people who develop strange superhero like powers. Can't remember the name of it now. But anyway, I'll try and review that sometime. Anyway, The Cabinet won the Moonhak Dongni Novel Award back in 2006 and finally reached English readers in 2022 or 2021, sorry. And so maybe this indicates that the novel's take on anxiety, capitalism, and the extremely weird ways that we adapt to situations is still very much relevant 2 decades later. And so this was actually Kim On-soo's second novel to be translated into English. And I've already reviewed the first of his novels that was translated into English. That novel was The Plotters. And The Plotters was a very stylish and imaginative crime thriller. And that really put Kim on the map for English readers. The Cabinet is very different. But it is equally clever and stylish and imaginative in execution. It's a sci-fi novel, and as such, it joins the list of excellent Korean sci-fi books that have been coming out over the past few years, such as On the Origin of Species and I'm Waiting for You by Kim Bo-young, and like I said, Tower by Bae Myung-hoon. And Tower especially, The Cabinet shares some similarities with, but The Cabinet is a very original and quite difficult to categorize novel. Tells a collection of stories about a group of exceedingly strange individuals who may represent the next stage in human evolution. And the poor, unfortunate office worker salaryman who is reluctantly who is tasked and takes on the task very reluctantly of keeping an eye on these very strange people. So, how are we introduced to this assortment of unusual characters? So, we meet all of these strange examples of evolution through the narrator. So the novel's protagonist is a decidedly average man. He has few aspirations. Doesn't have big goals or dreams. His name is Kong Dok-gun. He wasn't a great student, and he's always lacked a strong drive to succeed. And he says, back then, helplessness and dread lingered around my life like a thick fog. The word employment sounded like a distant dream. I had no talent, no experience to offer. When my friends asked me if I planned on getting married, inside my head I would say, married? I don't have any money to get married. Indeed, I would hate to cast a shadow over her future by combining it with my poor future. So he's someone who's kind of living in a difficult circumstances. He's not doing that great. But anyway, by luck, however, he does land a seemingly very run-of-the-mill office job where he comes to the attention of Professor Kwon, who gives him a special assignment. And that assignment is to look after the contents of Cabinet 13. What is Cabinet 13? So the assignment is he has to help Professor Kwon investigate, support, and just simply record the existence of a growing number of peculiar and seemingly impossible people who are popping up in Korea and around the world, and whom they refer to as symptomers. And so begins a very strange journey in which we meet these people, as well as a sinister, shadowy organization that is also pursuing them for their own nefarious ends. So, this might sound like a Korean version of the X Files, or even a very peculiar interpretation of the X Men comic books. Well, let me give you some examples of the types of unique individuals that Kim describes, and how is he using these individuals to comment on the contemporary world. So, like I said, the novel is structured like a series of interlinked short stories, and Mr. Kong is the thread that ties everything together. So, what usually happens is we're introduced to a symptomer, we hear their story, and then move on to the next one with this sort of bigger conspiracy theory thread kind of hanging over everything. And one of the first people we meet is a man who, inexplicably, for reasons unknown to himself or anyone around him, starts growing a ginkgo tree on his finger. And this tree will ultimately consume him if it just continues growing to a full sized tree. There are people that they refer to as time skippers, who lose years, or can use years of their life in the blink of an eye. So they randomly just time travel, kind of like that character in the Time Traveler's Wife, right? They have no control over this power. Just sometimes they will time travel, and suddenly they've just lost years of their life. And then there are another group of characters they call torporers. And these people find themselves having to go into extended periods of hibernation for many months at a time, which of course is extremely inconvenient. And then also we have people. There's a man who just finds himself compelled and able to eat metal. He can't stop eating metal. There's another person who is obsessed with turning into a cat, and many, many more strange and wonderful people. So, does Kim offer any explanation for why this is happening? What has caused the human species to start mutating in this way? So, of course, we can't help but wonder why this is happening. The novel has a satirical edge and seems to be taking aim at modern Korean and global society. So, the different symptomers highlight different dysfunctional elements of our modern lives, and the reader is invited to ask themselves, why now? Why is the human species evolving in such strange ways? And Kim seems to lay the blame on an accelerated and ultra capitalistic consumer society. So, for example, one of the symptomers tells Kong that the most lasting legacy of capitalism will be angst, insurance, stocks, real estate, investments. The entire modern economy is based on anxiety. It's a vicious cycle. Thus, we are always anxious internally and externally. Conversely, primitive humans were much more spiritual beings. One of the problems the symptomers highlight is this lack of spirituality in our lives and the increasingly unnatural way that we live them. And so the symptomers have evolved these strange mutations in response to our increasingly unnatural lifestyles. And whilst I was editing this review, I initially did this review back in 2022. I was kind of interested to see if there are any sort of new fads in evolutionary science that sort of chime with any of these things, and it was quite interesting actually. So let's just have a quick detour into science. So obviously, I am not an expert on evolution, and I'm not a biologist, but apparently. Uh, would you believe it? Modern evolution isn't just survival of the coolest superpower. And there's kind of a framing now. Again, don't at me, don't get back to me on this, right? But there's kind of a framing where evolution is kind of like admin with some surprises, right? So there is a sort of a newer view that says that variation is biased and plastic. So bodies, they try sort of workarounds first, and it's not perfect. And then they sometimes kind of lock these things in if the workaround works. And we build our own niches, or groups build our own niches. So like cities or offices or bureaucracy. I might not be understanding any of this right, by the way. And this pushes traits in certain directions. And then apparently evolutionary speaking, we also hedge bets with dormancy. That sounds a bit like the torporers who sort of nap. They're kind of strategically napping for natural selection. And then there's also this idea of the shifts in timing can sort of have an impact on life history. And this is called heterochrony, apparently. So we could see something like that in the time skippers, maybe. I don't know. So anyway, they kind of say these days that change isn't sort of a clean upgrade. It's messy, it's constrained, and it's shaped by our environments. And I guess the joke or the satire in the cabinet that is evolution is inconvenience, right? These symptomers aren't superheroes. They aren't X-Men. This isn't Charles Xavier and Magneto. They're this sort of plasticity and these timing glitches and the niche pressure and this sort of bureaucratic life collide. And then poor Mr. Kong has to make sense of all of this. Like I said, I don't know if any of that made any sense. But anyway, how successful is the cabinet? So it might sound like it's kind of a fragmented narrative. So does it hold together? So I enjoyed the cabinet a great deal. I thought it was a very fun reading experience. I enjoyed it a heck of a lot. Kim has an abundance of talent and imagination, and this is evident on every page. There's a fantastic introduction section, which I haven't really mentioned. There's a sort of wry, sardonic tone and dry wit to much of the narration, which I thought was very enjoyable. I appreciate that a great deal. Nevertheless, I think some readers might find it a frustrating reading experience. There is this narrative involving a sinister organization, but it's not the novel's focus, and it doesn't really feature prominently until until the final stretch of the story. And I'm sure there will be some readers will be put off by this sort of lack of forward momentum in terms of plot and narrative. But that's not the point of the book. What Kim is interested in is commenting satirically on the modern world, and his stories seem, if anything, increasingly relevant and insightful. Two decades after they were first published. So these interlinked stories in the cabinet, they come together and they form this sort of mosaic of a dysfunctional world, and it's animated by humor and this extremely enjoyable and very much out there kind of imagination. And just one more thing before I wrap up. So Kim wrote an article for Korean Literature Now magazine, quite interesting article. You might very well have read several similar articles to this in recent years. And the article is called "The Poverty of Imagination Era." And Kim argues, sweetheart, you okay? And what he argues is that despite the sort of the boom in visual media, peak TV and streaming, and all online, all the media content and video that gets uploaded every day, like this video you're watching now. So despite all of this sort of visual media, and that there's more TV shows or streaming shows and movies and all the rest of it, blah blah blah. all of these things, despite all this, we live in a story famine, he says. So the studios and the producers, they recycle ideas and remakes and sequels, while genuinely captivating narratives grow scarce. And I'm recording this just now, and the people are the movies at the cinema this past month was like the seventh Jurassic Park film, another Superman movie with another new Superman, um, and what was the other? And another new Fantastic Four, and probably I'm probably forgetting some things as well, right? But of course, people have been complaining about this for decades, right? But anyway, so he says that genuinely captivating narratives are growing scarce, right? And he links this to how we consume stories. He says, film and TV are energy efficient, right? These are passive experiences. Lots of people would take issue with that. But he says they're passive experiences that don't exercise our imagination muscle. Whereas reading is demanding. He refers to it as something like mental filmmaking. And that turns the reader into the director, the cast, the crew of unique inner movies. And then he talks about Robert McKee, famous, for giving presentations about storytelling and so on, that storytelling has declined in recent decades. And he also mentions, I hadn't heard of this person before, but Lisa Feldman Barrett, and he talks about her idea about the brain is the brain has a certain amount of energy that it budgets, and you'll have heard things like this in other places. This is the kind of thing that Daniel Kahneman or other, people like that, Richard Thaler, talk about, right? And so your brain has an energy budget. You've only got so much energy you can spend on things, right? And he contends, right? He argues that audiences are saturated with identical images, right? If you're sort of saturated with images all the time, you struggle to become to create an internal imagination. And in order to combat this, he suggests that to rejuvenate or to keep the storytelling industry alive, keep it going, you need to place literature at the center. And so novels should stay unapologetically literary. And this is good because the novels or literature can seed infinite images in readers' minds. And then the visual media can come along and maybe contribute by handling integration. And it's it is kind of an interesting argument. We've seen these kind of arguments many, many, many times before. I don't want to say too much about this. Watching movies isn't passive, but literature is obviously extremely important. And I heard someone talking recently, and there's been this sort of cycle of comic book adaptations over the past 3 decades, well, longer, I guess. And that the people who created these things and have been writing for them, the studios were very dismissive of them. They sort of looked down on them, and they didn't want to use them a lot of the time when they were adapting Superman or Iron Man or whatever into films. And this has led to some kind of not great films that are not terribly engaging, perhaps. And also, people always complain about the amount of remakes and so on. It really is ridiculous now. If you look at Netflix, it's like there are some directors and producers now, and their career is just sort of remaking and recycling things that have been adapted so many times. And it's just he might have some points here, right? But anyway, so does this connect to the cabinet, right? This challenge, we're dazzled by the imagery, the on-screen image. And this is obviously going to get worse now with AI and all this garbage, right? How can we recover the imaginative power that we're losing by not reading enough? And anyway, so he thinks this is a problem. There's too many screens, right? Well, culture is just recycling stuff. Audiences are passive consumers. Our imagination muscle has atrophied. Reading is too hard. It's energy hungry, and we need to try and do something to refocus on literature. So, what about the cabinet? So, the cabinet, we could say, is that argument turned into fiction. So, instead of superhero spectacle, this isn't the X-Men, right? It's inconvenient people. They're symptomers, right? They're these weird, odd people, right? And these are fragmentary case files. They reject formula, and they sort of force the reader to supply their own connective tissue, to bring your own empathy, and to make these images in your head, right? And so this cabinet 13, is a storehouse of these kind of stories of imagination, and the poor file clerk is a stand-in for this active reader that Kim is championing in his essay. The Mr. Kong is curating and interpreting these weird creations, whilst this faceless evil bureaucracy tries to flatten and control it. And maybe this is a bit of a stretch, right? Anyway, so let me know what you think. If hit the bell and the button, and if you've enjoyed this, let me know in the comments. And just take care. Have a good day, and I might get round to doing another video today. Who knows? Take care. Bye bye.